The word was spoken by the mouth of the prophets. Let it be. Times of hard working and poverty of souls. The flesh is at a crossroads. Behind the walls of lies, vices of hearts, the human heart despises the truth. Doomed to misery, blind slaves, systems of hungry spawn. And among all this crowd, nuggets hide in empty apartments on the outskirts of cities, tormented by everyone and at all times, utter the word of life with pure lips. The weak string will sink into the deep of oppression, and after it, a new life will be reborn under the all-seeing eye of God, the Spirit of Truth.
I welcome you to the Movement to the Light platform. We will not tell you how to act, how to think, and what to do. We only give you access to information and how to dispose of it. Decide for yourself. I want to say in advance that you should not look for justice, but you should look for yourself and your place in this world. Because in the world of manipulation and deception, it is difficult to find the right answers. From our side, they will also not be given. Only the keys will be given so that you can independently participate in the assembly of the game called life. And today it's time for the second series. The path of knowledge is associated with loneliness. Life is not something real but something temporary. Something real lies in the fact that life on earth is temporary. Real life flows from eternity, and eternity is not material but spiritual. The spirit proceeds from self-knowledge, giving man the inheritance of eternal and present life. Self-knowledge leads to renunciation, the renunciation of the world from the seeker, from the temporary world, gives the tools from self-realization, but it doesn't give the tools from knowledge. Knowledge is based on spirit and truth, on the recognition of world as a temporary phenomenon, not an eternal phenomenon. Anyone who finds himself inside through the realization of the spirit of truth will be free, but anyone who finds himself outside through the false ego and its realization will suffer. Modernity. We talk a lot about life, about goals, about motivation, about achievements, but the topic of death in our society is also taboo. But just as an alpha has an omega, so life has a beginning and an end. Why is so important to touch on the topic of death? For many people it isn't obvious, but the understanding that everything has its own time betrays life much more meaning than the search for pleasure and the realization of illusory fantasies. Sometimes when communicating with people, I can't help but think that they plan to live another 500 years and being young and without any diseases. Because of this, people constantly postpone all the most important things for later, instead of solving the main issues and tasks here and now, and then already enjoy the present moment. As they say, business is time and fun is in an hour. These mistakes were pointed out by many thinkers at different times. Let's take one of the wisdom of Islam. And for every nation is a specified term, so when their time has come, they will not remain behind an hour, nor will they proceed. What is the reason for such a disdainful attitude to life? The answer lies on the surface. Everything stems from ignorance. This is more than stupidity, because ignorance is an unwillingness to know about what is it, but a great desire to build an illusion about what is not. The only way to start moving in the right direction is through self-knowledge. This is probably the most difficult but also the most necessary knowledge that isn't taught in school, but now you have the opportunity to learn it now. Any correct movement begins from small to large. In this case, self-knowledge implies knowledge of your essence. It includes three aspects: body, soul, and spirit. For the knowledge of the body, one must study anatomy. For the knowledge of the soul, psychology, and for the knowledge of the spirit, religion. When we study our body, we study our own nature, which helps us to be in a healthy tone. But first of all, we should pay attention to the study of our brain, despite the fact that it occupies a small part of the eternal body. It sometimes consumes up to 20% of all energy. Most of the things of the brain does by itself, regardless of our desires, because we cannot stop the movement of the blood. We cannot force the stomach and digest food. We cannot force our body not to rest, and all these areas are responsible for brain activity, which must be studied to learn all its capabilities. At the initial stage, it will be quite enough to know that a person has innate psychological needs that will require satisfaction. There are only three of them: the desire for satiation, the desire for dominance, and the desire for reproduction. These three factors still determine the relationship between people. For most people, happiness is associated with filling their stomach, finding and spending exciting leisure time where a person has some authority and implementation and the end of their business. It is nice to have a partner with whom you can create a social unit, or a good partner for a good evening. The vast majority of people live by these principles. As for the regulation of relations between people, it is determined by the level of the mental health. If we break down the human psyche, it is divided into four types: psychotic, borderline, neurotic, and healthy group. Each of mind allows people to use the opportunities that it includes. Today we'll go through each type briefly so that you have a general idea. Psychotics are people with the level of the psyche of the 1-year-old child. Often this type of people suffers from psychorrhea, because the psyche is unstable and easily exposed to external influences. Border guards are people with the level of the psyche of a 3-7-year-old child. This type of people has emotional disruption of three directions: in the direction of want, in the direction of must, and with emotion taught inward. This type of person is called schizoid. Neurotic are people with the level of the teenager psyche. This type of people suffers from youthful maximalism, but unlike border guards, their speech is complex and relies more on facts and analysis than on emotions and desires. While border guards rely on a framework of excuses, reasons, and manipulations during their speech, neurotics rely more on facts, analysis, and conclusions. It is also worth considering that neurotics were once in the borderline group, so they have prevailing aspects in terms of negative or positive emotions. If the negative one prevail, it means that the person was a narcissist. Before one, if a positive ones, then the victim or the infantile. Of course, there are always exceptions, which in turn confirms the rule. A healthy group is people with the level of the psyche of their real age. Such people are almost impossible to meet, because all the patterns of society don't allow you to grow to this level. But those who were able to do this have a full range of emotions. They are well erudite. They know not only details, but also the essence. They not only see the picture, but also understand the context. This is different level of organization of life, where the main rule is multiplication, but not psychological needs. If you want to learn more about different types of people's minds, their content and reactions, then at the bottom of this video there will be a link to our other material, where this topics is covered in as much details as possible. Now we need to connect the psychology and psych to gain an understanding of the whole. If a person is psychotic or a border guard, then his psychology dictates the rules of the game. If a person is a neurotic or healthy person, then his psych is able to suppress psychological needs in the name of the higher goals. If we speak for the whole of humanity as a whole, then most of the inhabitants of the planet of Earth have a borderline type of mind. This in turn creates conditions under which people live more according to a biological laws and less according to, say, social ones. Hence, there are wars, all sorts of conflicts, both on domestic grounds and in business relations. Humanity, living according to biological laws, strives to fight for resources, dominate for power, and wants to receive the attention of the opposite sex to the maximum. Hence, the third part, which gives stability to the system, where the determinations are layerized by spiritual code. Spiritual laws are the laws of life that describe the processes in the society based on the knowledge of the essence, with the definition of problems and tasks for each group of people. Let us turn to the Eastern wisdom, which says that people have 5 levels of consciousness development. The first type of people belongs to the animaya, the second type pranamaya, third type manamaya, fourth type vajnamaya, and the fifth type anandamaya. Each type of consciousness gives a certain level of understanding of life. The lower of the level of consciousness, the lower of the level awareness. Let's go through each of them. The first type of consciousness is dominant, because most people have it. This type lives solely on the satisfaction on psychical needs, and even if a person receives in a high level of intellectual development, he uses the mind to further satisfy his needs in psychology. The second type of consciousness refers to people who live by psychical austerity. This type of personality tends to restrictions in food, intimacy and sleep. This clarity includes athletes, fans of Eastern practice, in particular yoga, lovers of fasting, and other restrictions that helps keep the body in good shape. Cycle exercise and compliance with the restrictions shows that person has risen a little above their needs, which undoubtedly affects their daily life. 3 types of consciousness rely solely on intelligence and logic. This type of people rely on the knowledge that they were able to emphasize from books. This is different type of professorship and doctor of science. Often a similar level of consciousness is inherent in people of the schizoid type, since then put intelligence in charge and emotions were excluded of everyday life. All three types on consciousness that have been described, although they give different content, but at the head of them lies ignorance, because often such people are very proud of what they have, in every possible way emphasizing their own importance both indirectly and directly. Based on the above, we have only two options that give people a little more than just knowledge. Level 4 of consciousness already implies that a person is aware of himself, more as a soul than as a body. To maintain this level, there is no longer enough knowledge on earth, since it is temporary. A person with this type of awareness turns to a higher institutions, where you can not only get knowledge about being but also can get grace. After all, there are things that are difficult or almost impossible to describe in words. Grace is one of those things, but it can be felt if you have a higher level of awareness. To my great regret, a lot of people are more imitators than practitioners. People are generally interested in something new and unusual, so often being carried away by Eastern and not only Eastern practicing. People go into the technical side of the issue. In particular, if you take our social formation, you can see on Sundays crowds of people who clog churches to the very doors. But what the use of this? If people think more about how to pray, what to say and for whom to leave notes, all this is just technique and it does not apply to grace, because mimicry is just a beautiful fake, but the truth is always the same and it can only be understood by people with the 5th level of awareness. This type implies sincere service to God and His laws. These people are more detached from the world, but not because of their own desire, but because the world doesn't need such people. And here we are confronted with the main thesis of this series, loneliness and suffering. These words are empty in themselves, because there is nothing behind the world. Everything is hidden in the context. A person can be lonely, but the reasons for the loneliness can be different. Often people are lonely for two reasons. The first, people have mental disorders, in particular suffer from social phobia, so they hide from society instead of solving problems, because their life is based only on fear. And the second reason is that the person has a shitty character and it's just unpleasant to communicate with him, a kind of spider that constantly pours out its bile everywhere, always at everyone. But there are, in a special case, people who simply know a little more about the world than others, and already other people avoid them, because during the conversation there are no familiar patterns and you have to think, and most of them don't know how to think and do not want to. To sum up, life on Earth is finite, and this aspect should be the basis of the worldview which will give rise on the development of available thoughts. A person's life is determined by the presence of qualified knowledge, both in the field of the psychology and in the field of psychology and spiritual laws, facts and figures. The words themselves not mean anything. It is always important to look for the motive for which the fact happened. Suffering and loneliness may or may not go hand in hand. Everything will depend on the levels of awareness of the person who brought such phenomena into his life. Striving for God is more a skill than a gift, for a gift is a gift and a skill is a whole work on oneself. And the last thing, remember, one series will not give an exhaustive answer to everything. We did this deliberately so that you would come to the conclusion that there is no one answer to everything, that the answer to everything lies in the answers to many questions. These questions will be discussed in the next series, which will complement each other so that you have a complete picture, because the whole, although it is a combination of many details, is not always identical to them, just like grain is an essential part for bread, but isn't bread originally. And in order for the grain to become bread, it will require the right effort. This is where we'll end today. Peace to you and to your home.